faded walls where paintings had once hung. Even if he ignored his own emotions, he still had a problem with Jane and Nicholas's appeal for him to seek out happiness with a bride. Did Nicholas and Jane not understand that what they had was special? Most people did not find that kind of happiness ever. And love? He didn't believe such a thing could exist, not for him, not ever. Jules stopped pacing before the massive display of weaponry. He reached up and fingered the dull tip of one of the swords. The metal was cool to his touch, echoing the cold emptiness of his soul. Happiness was a rare commodity, and wanting something more than what life had offered him so far would only lead the way to more disappointment and pain, which was why he had created her. Jules smiled as his gaze moved to the third letter on the desk. A letter from Claire, his newly created wife. She was a perfect woman. She never complained, did not mind his late nights out or his discreet dalliances. She did not expect his adoration or his love. She never spent money. And best of all, she always kept her opinions to herself. His Claire was a perfect invention, and his only salvation. He had created Claire to distance himself from Jane and Nicholas and keep them from interfering in his life. He did not want to be near their happiness or be reminded of his own unrequited love. But Claire, even if simply on paper and an invention between himself and his solicitor, would help him far more than he had ever imagined at her inception. She would allow him the time he needed to untangle the mess his father and brother had left behind. If he were lucky, she would also keep the creditors at bay. Who wasn't sympathetic to a newlywed couple in their first weeks of life together? It might give him time to find some way to save the estate. A sound at the doorway brought Jules's gaze around. His father's servant, John Finney, stepped into the room, carrying a tea tray Jules had not requested.
"I brought you something to ease your pain,"
Finn said, setting the tea upon the carpeted desk. It would take something stronger than tea to accomplish that. But Jules was not his father or his brother. Whiskey at 10 in the morning was not for this MacIntyre. He would not repeat his brother's foolishness and poison himself with whiskey.
"Thank you, Finn,"
Jules replied, meaning the words. He was grateful for the refreshment and just as pleased not to be utterly alone. Jules studied his companion. The aging retainer was dressed in the same threadbare jacket and breeches he had worn for as long as Jules had been alive.
"Beg pardon me,"
the old retainer said, coughing before he could finish his words. Finn cleared his throat and tried again.
"Beg pardon, my lord. A messenger brought these for you."
He shuffled forward, holding 4 letters. Jules frowned at the messages. He recognized the tight and neat handwriting on the top letter as that of his solicitor. The other 3 were most likely duns or more pleas from Nicholas and Jane for him to pursue happiness and love. Jules' frown deepened at the lack of a silver salver or even a wooden platter to deliver the messages upon. The silver had long since been sold, along with all of the paintings, most of the furnishings, and anything else that could fetch a price and keep the creditors at bay for a few days more. Jules reached for the first letter. As expected, it was from his solicitor, Grayson, but the contents were not what he had counted upon at all. Ever since Jules had created his wife, Grayson had stepped into the role of her scribe and had been sending him 1 letter each week for the past 5 weeks in the voice of Claire. Jules' fingers tightened on the letter. He could only focus on a few words.
"Your father, no money. Unknown benefactor."
Jules closed his eyes and concentrated on his breathing. Then, very slowly, he opened his eyes and read the letter in its entirety. He had waited for this information for the past 7 months since his release from jail. He supposed he could have come home and asked his father himself, but he had hired Grayson to do the investigation instead, wanting nothing more to do with the father who had closed his eyes to his own wife's machinations. Regardless of his father's past sins, Jules had wanted to know the truth about his release. Grayson had discovered part of what Jules longed to know. His father and brother had not had the funds to pay his ransom and release him from jail, but neither had they come to visit nor bring him a scrap of food or even a blanket, some small comfort to ease his pain. And to add more misery to his already overburdened soul, Grayson was no more able to discover who had secured Jules's freedom than he had during his own investigation. It was why Jules had gone